Hello and welcome, beautifuls. This is February 11th, 2025. And I am Rainey Ford, and this is RoniJean. And we have come to you here to talk this evening about the intersectionality between goals, methods, and priorities, the ways that we can examine details in logistical and systemized ways that can help to bring yummy efficiency to what we are creating and lens stacking that with how we can do that inside of things like how we build our lanes, roles, hats, and tasks for like how we get projects started and off the ground. Ways that we might want and need to look at ourselves in relationship to ourselves, our selves in relationship to relationship, missions, community, and how we can apply detailed based thinking inside of larger system based conversations. And I would love to have RoniJean start us off this evening and really kind of dive deep into what is meant by goals, methods, and priorities, and how is there a multilectic way that we can step into examining something that otherwise might have a little bit of dreary drudge behind it. How can we bring a little lightness to it and really go there? RoniJean, pass the talking stick to you and let you take it away.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about how we seek discernment regarding our collaborations, where we're in relationship with people, where we're sharing space, where we're actively working on a project together, what goals, methods, and priorities have come to the surface for me to mean is the various ways that we are going to end up going about what we're doing, how we're focusing, how we're engaging in the process. And once we're engaging alongside someone else, let alone lots of someone else's, little differences inside of our goals, our methods, or our priorities can divert whether or not our processes collaborate well together. And ongoing collaboration, something that we can come back to and look at is, again, our goals, methods, and priorities as we move through longer form processes, whether we're in a nonprofit together or running an event together or meeting for a book club, whatever it is we're doing. We can be neighbors and we have yard pieces that meet. I don't know what are our goals and as individuals as well as collectives we can begin to find the granular line of sight on where we might have had different ideas, or if we're planning ahead, where our ideas might differ, where we can negotiate what do we want to weave in and what needs to have a boundary. Because if we try to weave everything in, then the feasibility of our success on any level becomes less steady, less accessible. So looking a little deeper at goals, methods, and priorities. They support our discernment. It's an incredibly effective way to either plan or retroactively restore. Remembering that we can work this from either end and utilize this exploration in either way is super useful. We often look at these things separately or in pairs or at different times in our collaborative processes. It's not that I think that this is new territory. I think that we could approach it a little differently and have it serve us in greater ways. Individually, each of these pieces lets us look at details to see if everyone is on board who's planning to collaborate in ways that let us move forward collectively where our cooperation is in lockstep with one another and therefore more functional. In concert, goals, methods, and priorities and examining them offers a great deal of understanding about why we are operating the ways we are. And this can help us reduce frustration. It can help to steady uncertainty and amplify our sense of community within a project. While each of these areas can and do influence others, considering them separately offers granular understanding of where things are conducively aligned. And then considering those separate things as a collective can give us all the advantages they have to offer. Looking at understanding our goals, this can give clarity to our focus, supporting negotiated expectations. I am a huge fan of negotiated expectations. For me, this has been relevant in every area of my life and has helped reduce a great deal of worry and anxiety around things that are happening inside of my relating. Because if it hasn't been negotiated and I find myself with an expectation cropping up, then that lets me know that that's something I need to talk about. Sometimes, even with myself, I can stop a shame or blame cycle internally if I remind myself that we didn't choose to do that for ourselves, right? That's not a thing that we set as a plan. And even though in a moment I can see, oh, that would have been a really great thing to do, I can cut back on the spiraling that can happen due to feeling ashamed that I didn't think of a thing ahead of time, or feeling like I wish I would have been able to do that thing if I had thought of it a little more, a little earlier. That can derail a chunk of our time, if not our relating. And so being able to step in and remind myself that it's really important to hold ourselves accountable for that which we agree to. And if we haven't consciously thought about it and agreed to it, it's not fair to ourselves or to others. It can tell us, hey, this is a place, our system, our body, our soul, our being is reaching for some kind of negotiated expectation, with the recognition that renegotiating can happen where needs shift and change. It can also show us critical differences, especially between our personal drive and buy-in and the collectively chosen orientation, meaning where are we going inside of our collaboration? Where are we going inside of our project and this time we've chosen to spend and put our efforts in together? Can also allow greater inclusion and clearer exclusion, right? Figuring out where we choose collectively to weave in our personal orientations and mindfulness about intersectionality and compatible additions. We might find 100 extra things that would be really great connected in with our project, connected in with our activity for the day. And yet, can the project hold all of those things well? Not always. And so that's where we may need to apply a boundary to support our feasibility of success. Understanding our methods shapes our passions into actions. How we go about a thing is going to determine a great deal about what is practical for the project or endeavor. With certain methods, some of those additional things may be more easily incorporated, and some may be harder, more difficult to incorporate. Can also assist in keeping everyone on the same page. If we have thought about, we've considered what methodologies we're going to use, and then communicated that, then the likelihood that we each hold a deeper understanding of what it is we're doing gets higher, gets more intense and amplified. When we lose cohesive understanding, we risk losing functional cooperation. That's a really unfortunate thing that can happen with really subtle differing ideas about how we're going about something. Refining our focus, they can help us as we choose what methods we're using to accomplish any particular goals. We can help our choice making, our determining of what of the vision is possible and what is probable, showing us what is at the edges of our capacity versus what is centered on our capacities. Having that balance, having us be able to operate from the best possible centering position so that we're not having everyone push to their edges to accomplish a thing, so that we're choosing and negotiating where someone is pushing to their edges. That can be a strengthening thing to push to our edges. It can also be an exploratory thing. And having an entire project or an entire job work at the edges of our capacities does not set us up to be able to sustain our taking part in whatever process that is. It also reveals necessity as we choose methods. We can have 100 different ways something can be done, and that's wonderful for when we need to pivot, and it's wonderful for having lots of options and to begin to activate, take action on our goals by choosing and being mindful about the methods we've chosen. We can understand what our how needs, what it is that lets us proceed from vision to action. Getting into our priorities. Understanding priorities can be so incredibly helpful. One of the things you'll see here is that it organizes our actions, which sounds similar to some of what methods do, and is definitely something that happens in part by the shaping of our goals. What I'm talking about here specifically is this difference between functional organizational logistics, functional and or organizational logistics. We're going to start a fire. We're going to have a fire. So we're going to gather wood. We're going to gather dousing material. We're going to lay the fire and we're going to ignite it. We need some of these things to happen before others can happen. We want some of them to happen to stay safer before others happen. Our preferential logistics is what I'm calling this other piece, which is shaped by our priorities. And it can redirect our actions at any point in the process. The vision holder or the holders of the vision can at any point have this thing that arises in them that they feel so called to pursue that says, this is a priority inside of what we're doing. And if we didn't take the time to consider that beforehand, then that has a greater likelihood of causing disruption as we move through a process. If we've got 5 other people taking part in doing things that are a part of what our next is, and we change up our next, those things may still be useful and they may suddenly become irrelevant. And that can be incredibly disappointing to the other people involved or to anyone who's involved. It can slow our entire progress down on whatever we're trying to accomplish. So, understanding and communicating our priorities as we plan, and also retrospectively when we have things come up where it doesn't seem like we're on the same page anymore, or periodically throughout a process. Because sometimes what's happening in the world around us shifts, and taking a look again at where our priorities are, where each of our goals, methods, and priorities are, can allow us more graceful pivots to meet the needs, meet the priorities, meet the call that we are answering. Um, this is why I've stated that understanding and communicating our priorities can be one of the most beneficial acts of consideration we can employ. This also empowers understanding. I am a huge fan of data and knowledge. It can get us across resistances that we have. It can have things make sense in a way that other people are willing or driven even to take part in a process with us if we can come to understand what people are trying to do and why. The why can make the difference between an action seeming reasonable, making sense, or not. And that can be the difference between us feeling empowered to continue to push to achieve a goal via a method at the point where it's been prioritized. Even if our process of working with those things might be frustrating at times. So if we're trying to build a tent, what we've had to assemble pieces from five other tents, that can seem really daunting and might not work. However, if what we've got is extra tent poles and an extra tent, and we had extra people show up, and we understand that they could get to stay and be a part of this event we're holding, and that's why we're attempting to put this thing together. The vigorousness through which we might be willing to engage in that process can be shifted entirely. Or somebody could have this beautiful idea come up that alters having to fight with that and still allows us to utilize the pieces we have to meet the new goal that we've added in. So empowering understanding is super beneficial to collaboration. All right. That is the introductory piece that I have. So I'm going to stop my share.
Now. Mm-hmm. I feel a lovely richness in the focus that each one invites us to look through and to feel through. Goals, methods, priorities feel like it feels like how we might look at a map of something. What's our goals? Kind of reminds me a little bit of projections. Methods reminds me a little bit about like, how you might go about doing a things, and your priorities being the like, what are you putting in order of attending to? And when I think about things in my world around the pieces that I'm going to be popping up on the screen next, I think it's a wonderful, simplistic way to approach what can sometimes feel a little daunting. Like every time we go to start a new thing, whether we're starting a new relationship or a new job or a new endeavor, there's so many pieces and parts to consider, and we can often feel like, oh, am I considering all the right things? Am I making the best choices for myself? And by looking through those kinds of things through these lenses for ourselves, starting first with ourselves, it feels like it helps us get real clear, to be really kind of in tune with that whole process.
Something that is really important, I feel, to mention is that it doesn't mean we have to have all these answers.
Right.
We get to
Right.
through this process and go, oh, I'm not sure about that yet. Clearly in our relating. And then we remember that it's a thing to come back to,
Right.
that it's a thing we're in exploration mode on.
Right. And even those of us who love data and love diving into the details, we too get to be human and be in the process while we're also capable of stepping out and seeing it and then stepping back into the living of it. It's not to the exclusion of being a part of the journey ourselves, because that doesn't work.
Exactly.
Okay, so before I pop this thing up on my screen and it's like, okay, there's a lot of things on it, I would love to lay out a very, just a deep simplicity. Touchstones comes from the perspective of, well, in this case, we're going to be we're looking at a matrix, meaning that we're looking at like a big picture as a snapshot in one image, and kind of looking at, this one spans from self to three different kinds of relationship: missions, i.e. visions, and community. And inside of that, there's community and egregore. So there's like 7 lenses that we're actually looking through. In the relationship, we're looking through peered, powered, and leadership. And that was for the ability to lean into equality-based relationships, equality, equity, all of those kinds of based conversations, and then talking about that plus power, and sometimes to the exclusion, because we're not always in a peer-based relationship when there's a powered-based relationship happening. And what does that look like to be inside of responsibility and accountability in those places? Let alone if we were to lens stack them together, where we're inside of an equality-based peer relating, where there is power and influence that the other doesn't have. What does that look like to be in relationship, right? So we can move from deep simplicity to deeper and deeper complexity as we need to attend to the question or moment at hand. When I go to pop this up on the screen, you're going to see all of it at once. And what you're seeing is the matrix, which is those 7 lenses: self and relationship with 3 of them, mission 1, and community has 2. And we're looking at through awareness, sovereignty, communication, and agency. We're not studying all of that tonight. We're not delving into that micro. This is the macro of that. We're kind of like from an eagle's eye perspective, looking at it and going, how can we see ourselves through all of these lenses? Now, where might we want to see relationship through all of these things? Where do we want to center our ability to dive into something? And as we pop through, we'll talk a little bit about where and how. And I'd like to invite you to keep in your mind what RoniJean was speaking about around goals, methods, and priorities. Because what they were speaking about in regards to there being deep nuances that at different points we might be asking different questions. You're going to get to see an array of ways of being able to apply that kind of in-depth detail. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can dive into it for a moment. Okay, I'm going to try another way. I'm going to share my screen this way. Oh, no, that's not going to give me both. Um, back that up. Try it a different way. There we go. All right. Okay. So what we're looking at here, I'm going to this be in a presentation mode. There we go. Okay. So what you're looking at is the touchstone matrix, where we're looking at all of it. Remember, most of the time when we're actually in a touchstone moment or a thing is happening and we are having a touchstone based conversation, we're not necessarily looking at all of this unless you're a person who holds a lot of data. In that case, you might be. In this case, we're looking at it in this kind of way to be able to say, this particular set of information invites us to look at self at center. And so this is where everything that we are considering, our goals, methods, and our priorities, our ways that we are honing our lists, our to-dos, our roles, our tasks, everything is about us. It's like, how am I affecting myself? How are my relationships affecting me? How am I affecting my relationships? How is the mission affecting me? How am I affecting the mission? How am I affecting the community? How is the community affecting me? But it's all self-centric. Many, many people live their entire lives only ever looking through this lens. And it's a helpful thing to understand that if this is all you ever look through, there's nothing wrong with that. Please understand that that is what's being looked through. Like if this is an invitation to be able to see, because you'll see down the line, you're going to see this little green line move over and it's going to turn to red and it's going to highlight relationships. And we're going to look at things from a relationship at center. You can put mission at center. You can put community at center. And so you have the ability to see how your goals, methods, and priorities might change depending on what you're looking at and how. Into this one here for a quick moment. So let's just examine what that looks like. When we're talking about self, and you see me write the little s with the slash and the big S, it's meant to be this like code word that's a visual, that's a trigger, that's to remind us about being human and divine. We're not here to not make choices about our skin suit, our travel vehicle, our body, our unconscious. This is things that we're often not aware of. And so our biggest compassion ends up being to this that lives life in an unknowing place, while also honoring our divine soul spirit side of things that may have much more information than we do, and we're becoming aware of it. So it's like, what is really needed for self? When we're talking about something that's for self, This is all about how it's affecting for the self, what's needed for the self. And we examine this first so that we don't bypass what's needed at the core. And then the from the self is what we need the other to know about us, like information about ourselves for and towards another, care and tending instructions for a whoever kind of being, right? So that's the where we are responsible in ourselves for ourselves, and then responsible for ourselves to share ourselves. And that being a foundational building block upon which all of the other things are being built off of. And so we'll frequently come back to these two places of learning and becoming more aware of, more sovereign in, building our communication of, and enhancing and being more responsible and accountable to our agency of how we carry ourselves, and then how we show up inside of relationship, or show up inside of our missions, or show up inside of community. And the hows of how we do that feels like that plugs in directly into the goals, methods, and priorities. So here we look at, on the self side, what's needed for self, we're examining ways we get to become more honest with ourselves about our emotions, the good ones and the hard ones, the ways we tend to think and hold stories, our mentality, the ways our bodies might want needing, tending, care, and supporting. That's our physicality. The energy that we choose to, that we are called to embody as ourselves, our energetics. Like, how do we want to show up in the world? When we're having a bad day, how do we want that to be in the world? What do we want to pass on to our children in our communications with life, and how we are choosing to be? From the self, we can pop over to this side of things, and we get to examine ways to be more honest about ourselves to others, right? See, there's a trend here. This first level of like self stuff is all about becoming more and more honest about our goals, our methods, and our prioritizations, because those are the ways that we can communicate how we are, right? What information is important for the other to know about us in order to interact with us well, right? One person might like being alone and gardening, and another might enjoy playing with knowledge or being a technological geek and playing with computers. Some might be people oriented. Some might have a busy brain and be a bit of an overthinker. Some might have a default mode of being in a standoffish kind of, when they engage, it's not like they're just very quiet and meek. They are like, yeah, what's your problem? Knowing this about yourself, that might be a method to which a person's energy might respond in a moment, and then another person being okay, like saying, okay, well, that doesn't necessarily work for me. Can we find a way to prioritize creating safe space and find a way to XYZ, right? So those goals, methods, and priorities in this kind of way can be a way that we get to see if we're aligned to be able to work together and be able to be flexible. Some people may not be able to be flexible in a particular period of time. These are all ways in which that alignment piece feels like it wraps back around to the alignment aspect, which we'll wrap back around and invite RoniJean to share a little bit more about where we can play with that. Yeah. So this is the first level of it when we're talking about self. As we step into the next lens of it, we're moving into the kind of a next phase of looking at in relationship at center. Remember, peered, powered, and leadership. And here we've got this blue that runs across the screen here in this odd way is meant to imply that we start at equal relating, and in order to move through powered and leadership, by the time we get to leadership is a lens stack of peered and powered, and then how it's done with integrity. And so it's showing a prioritization in that process, and that all of these things end up coming back around to how it affects the relationship. So it's like being able to put the relationship, and remember, relationships are a combination of the spirit, the passion, the energy, the goals, methods, and priorities of two individuals or more that come together to create an energy that is more than the sum total of their parts individually. On a simple level, we would call that an egregore. And you'll see that at the very last part of this touchstone, which is about the collective energy, the vibe. It can also be seen as a reputation in a logistical way. So we might look at the reputation of a relationship. We might look at the reputation of a certain brand or style of leadership. We might look at the reputation of a mission or an event or an organization or an administration and be able to look at what it is, the fruit of what it is that they are bearing. Like, how are they, what's the result of what they're creating? It's a way of being able to even look at ourselves. What is the result of what we are creating? What's the result of our self-care? What's the result of our boundaries? What's the result of being able to show up for ourselves in the ways that allow us to step into the things that we feel called to? And so examining relationship is very different than examining from self at center. The goals, methods, and priorities are entirely different. They are based on the sum total of parts and what happens when they come into relationships. So there's an alchemy process that happens right from the get-go. So that's why coming into self first and being real clear on your own goals, methods, and priorities, so that when you step into the relating through jobs, situations, relationships, etc., there is this ability to hold on to your own way of being while looking at what's being offered on the table and go, am I willing to, able to be a part of this or not? And it feels like it can bring so much clarity to places where there's deep confusion when we start to spread that information out on the table rather than lump it all into a bowl and expect it all to make sense. In this next slide, we're looking at it kind of similarly as we just were, so that we kind of keep that same methodology. We have how the self speaks and behaves towards the other. So now we're beginning to shift that burden of responsibility from it being only about the self, then out to something else, then back about the self. Here it's about how the self speaks and behaves towards the other. What's the ball that you're throwing at another? How are you telling someone about your goals, methods, and priorities? How are you being transparent about your goals, methods, and priorities? And how are you behaving yourself like those are what you have? Because sometimes we can behave differently than what we think we are doing. And we may not always know that until we sit down and examine it. Like, examine, how do we think, talk, and treat others, right? How do we do that when we're frustrated, when we're confused, when we're defensive, when we're lonely, when we're sad? Becoming aware of the stories that we carry and hold about another and with another, and the ways that that might come out in our languaging, ways that it might also change our prioritizations. It might change our goals. If we are looking realistically at what a relationship can be, and we recognize that what that relationship can be is not something that is of service to us, we might leave it at relationship at center and then step away and go, for myself, this is not necessarily of service here. And although I may be able to be of service to it, if it is not also of service to me, then we might have not achieved a win-win yet. And while that can feel really hard, sometimes it can be easier. Sometimes we need to get to go on the journey to experience the thing that's being shown to us. And sometimes we get to have the opportunity to go, I don't need to go that route. I don't need to get spun around in a way that I've already experienced. And that gets to be our deep journey, right? Seeing how we play in those ways. From the other, ways that can be received from the other. So now we're not even looking at ourselves anymore. We're looking at ways the relationship with these people, of which we are part of, and not only, can survive and thrive. And those being two different things. So like just the conversations around goals, methods, and priorities around survival versus thrival could be its own topic of conversation inside of relating and looking at ways that certain kinds of relationships need in order to survive and thrive. So this, we're kind of looking at perhaps care instructions for a blank kind of relationship, whether it's a friendship relationship or a partnered relationship. This could be a peered relationship. This could be a powered relationship. This could be a leadership level. And so some of these things that we're trying to examine here is the care that might be needed. If it's aligned for people, for each person to be a part of the thing, and then how. It might be helpful to look and examine about ways how what the other person does affects yourself. And that is to be able to understand how it affects yourself, which then affects how you're able to contribute back in, right? So how the ways that the other person may hold power may affect you, and then the ways that you may respond to that and then affect the relationship in return, right? So it's really looking at that give and take. So now you're looking at goals, methods, and priorities from almost like let's put this method and goals and priorities over here. And then we look over here and go, okay, so how did these goals affect this over here? How did do these methods align with this person's abilities over here? Does it align with this person's priorities over here? Like if one person is a person who prioritizes knowledge and data and understanding, and another person prioritizes physical manual labor, they might need to be really clear about what they're each capable of, because they might be expecting one person to be contributing in a way that they can't or aren't able to in the fullness that the other might. Right? And so being able to really parse that down, and or when there is a problem and a rupture that comes up, either in like self-doubt or in a rupture, like you're inside of a situation, something comes up and you either feel internally like this quaking of like, okay, there's something amiss, or there's something that's rupturing between you and another person, to be able to examine the rupture and see what has ruptured. Did you have a misplacement of goals in your relating or in yourself? Did you have a misplacement or an unawareness of methods in the relationship or in yourself? Did you have, right, and keep going, prioritizations? Did you somehow end up with a difference in prioritizations in the relationship or even inside of yourself? We those of us who are in the healer modalities and community and in deeply powerful ways, we often abandon ourselves. It's just part of a thing that we tend to like do, because we've learned that care means to step out of ourselves. It means to, or to step to be in ourselves, but to like not only be about here. And so it's out here, and as soon as we go out here, we have the risk of losing something, losing focus on something, losing an awareness of something. Coming back to those simplicities around goals, methods, and priorities really can help us touch base on, are these still aligned? Is it aligned for this situation or this moment? Does it work for this person? In this rupture, what of these things might have been part of the rupture that I might need to re-examine and go back into, seeing what might want to shift. Okay. Oh, this is a little slide that's kind of like a pondering of relationships at center, from the perspective of looking at what is needed for the other, listening to them, verifying, clarifying as needed, and then being in a relationship with what information is for or towards another, right? So kind of like imagine in this lower part of the image how each person in this graphic might be feeling as they're relating with the ones in the image with them. So there's three sets of images here, right? There's this one in the middle. And so for this moment, let's just focus on this one. And imagine this gentleman here who has this gift in his hand. He knows what's in that bag. He's excited to give it. He's eager. He's got all of his energy is reaching out in eagerness, and he's hoping that it's a cookie and not a dead mouse, as like, what the other person might appreciate. And over here we have, they're also interested and curious. They may not know what is inside of this, right? And so there's this a hesitation, an invitation, a receiving, a curiosity. And so being able to be in a place of examining a situation and going, what could this person's positioning be? What could this, and to do it with a lightness that doesn't bring absolutism into it, that doesn't lock people into frames or labels, and gives the ability to potentially have a deeper expansion outside of one's own preconceived notions of how things are. This is going to bring us automatically into a place of tuning into our own triggers and responses, because our emotionality is going to come up when we begin to explore this, and learning to separate that process, not separate as in lose track of it and bypass it, meaning to separate it and go, this is my work. This is the in relationship work. And then we can give honor to what is ours and to what is doing and involving with another, because when we step into this other work, that generally is with the other and that asks of something of the other, where this work with ourselves is, this is where we are parenting, learning to parent and be with ourselves. While we may love and appreciate and want support in this way, in this process, this is our responsibility. And so being able to treat it as such, where in the relationship side of things, we understand that that is the place where it can only happen if we show up together. And that if component needs to depend on having those negotiated expectations. So there isn't this weight around like having to be at someone else's beck and call. Let's tune into this little image down here. There's a whole lot of bickering and fighting going on with these characters down here, right? So when we start getting into like, yeah, but I said this and then you said this and I meant this and you responded this way, we don't end up in a place of really, sometimes we go there to be able to put all the cards on the table, and being able to tune into that in a way that doesn't lead us down a destructive path, right? Where we can come back to going, okay, that rupture brought a deeper awareness that perhaps our goals, methods, and priorities might want to shift in these kinds of ways, allowing it to teach us and grow us for ourselves or our relationships, can give us like this educational training grounds. Because so much of how we think and how we curate our thinkings, how we mentally approach situations really affects things. The actions that we choose, don't choose, or allow to happen, and the energy that we choose to embody as we relate with the other has a deep level of influence in not only the other, but also our own journey as well. So being in relationship with that in as much as we can help to bring a deeper awareness to ourselves in a cellular way, which as we work through those processes, by the time we get to a place like this and we're looking at the mission level and we're looking at how missions and visions and future, like for the next 7 generations down the line, what we do now affecting 7 generations down the line, when we start looking at those things from the mission lens and we look and see how that mission wants to affect our relationships, asks a bigger ask of ourselves, how it asks community to step up and create village care for the children and with each other, and to accept disparaging clans and quadrants that other parts of the world may not be accepting of, and being able to step back and look at the mission level to see what is the energy of what is being created at the egregore level, lets us really tune into how the systems of governance that we implement at every level, and we implement it. Here's an example of a system of governance: a vehicle. It gets us from point A to point B. It's got a speed limit. There's rules on the road. We can't just go out and do whatever the heck we want, and we can go do what we want, right? It's like there's parameters in which we can function. The same thing happens inside of missions. Missions are born from visions. Visions are often born from callings, right? Well, I'm not speaking about the kinds of missions that are based in capitalism here. I'm speaking about the ones that are based in heart-centered. I'm speaking about the ones that are based in your spirit callings, and I'm speaking about the ones, and I'm not speaking about it from the perspective like you don't get to make money in this process. They're not based solely in a me only member. So we're playing inside of TouchStones where you start with self first and then you work through relationship. And now we're looking at mission, which is considering all of these pieces. And so things like capitalism don't even play a role here, because capitalism doesn't ever really examine self. It doesn't examine things through relationship. It doesn't take accountability into things. It doesn't look at goals, methods, and priorities for everyone. So we're talking an entirely different kind of game here at this point. And it feels like it asks and it invites these systems that we create to hold events, to create spaces for our children to go and learn in safe and enriching ways, places where we can go for higher education and degrees and certifications, all of these systems of governances in our education, inside of our politics and how we create rules and governances and codes and guidelines for how we look at the way the world is being operated in a sense. All of these things can be looked at through the lens of the mission and how it's being served, right? You're looking for the responsibility for the expression of the values and looking at the accountability for the impact of the reputation. Those are the two biggest pieces when it comes to the mission aspect of things and how it's value based and looking at things in a long arc kind of way. And so I'm going to sum that up there, because this whole missions thing, much like the relationships, is a very vast subject. I'm trying to just give an overview and see where at all these different points, how goals, methods, and priorities really shape what gets created. Because if my goals, methods, and priorities at the mission level, that can shape the difference between whether or not it feels safe, whether or not it feels inclusive, whether it feels welcoming, whether it's empowering, whether it's flexible with the times, whether it meets the cultural wound that's currently at the heart of what's being felt by the collective. Being able to attend to all of those pieces and to not self-abandon at any point along the way here. Feels like that crux. And same here. Community has such a powerful role to play by stepping up as a powerful voice. And that's one of the reasons why RoniJean and I feel so passionate about sitting here and doing this at this level early in the game for free or by donation, access to the community. We want the community to feel empowered to step up into their voice, to support themselves, to support the things they have a calling for, because there is deep power within the common unity of community and that community voice. And the egregore lives in there in the community because it's the energetic component of the community. That vibe, that reputation has a voice of its very own. And so there's such power at the level of the multitude, of those who bond together over a particular kind of experience. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into this. I will leave this. We might play with this a little bit later if, actually, ooh, okay. There's two slides here. They speak about the order and the prioritizations when you start putting multiple things that are at center together inside of the same consideration. Meaning, for example, tonight here with you all, RoniJean and I have both individually created things. We have both had callings to this. We've both had self-care things and life transformational stuff that brought us to be able to be with you here on this call tonight. And we've also sat down and agreed before this, we arranged how we were going to do this. So there was a three-way level of consideration for this one layer of experience that we're having collectively here tonight. And so it's a little bit like, I'm going to just skip to the next one, because this lens is kind of showing you how you can lens stack things. I think we probably, in this call tonight, we're probably mission at foci with three at center, because there's RoniJean and there's a me. Those are the two selves. There's the relationship that RoniJean and I both have in a peered and a powered and a leadership way. And then we have this collective mission that we're called to, which brings us to this meeting here. Being clear about how you're stacking your lenses with people can make such a difference in the kind of clarity that can be present. And I think that that focus is really found at the alignment place. This is where I want to pass the stick back to RoniJean and stop my share and invite her to pick up with the considerations that you had had with the goals, methods, and priorities around how to look at that alignment so that when we go to play here, we have a sense of where to look. Please and thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Inside of navigating everything that showed up on the TouchStones matrix and with the things that Raine has covered, at each point in the considerations for and from self in relationship, mission, and community, there are these opportunities to understand ourselves and understand the collective efforts and know what we're bringing, how we want to show up, what we can show up inside of and for, which means that we can dance with our capacities, our desires, our abilities to withstand what's necessary through the methods at hand, right? So that we can make the most out of each thing we choose to endeavor in. Practicing these things, beginning to initiate the mindsets that have us thinking in these ways, can become a thing that is easeful for us to do in a variety of circumstances. Once we have taken time to sit and get to know ourselves around a situation, a possibility, then we can step in to that possibility differently than if we just wung it. And if we take the time to inquire with others about their part of things, then what we bring together is so much richer and far more understood, which means that, again, we can dance with it better, knowing who's got the ability to catch a physical piece of logistics and who's got the ability to catch a safety protocol and be mindful of it, who is just wired that way and they're going to notice the things and they may or may not be able to carry the water so that's in range for putting the fire out. Right? That might not be what they can do. They might be able to notice all the things and make sure that information gets to people who can take the physical actions to meet their awareness action and communication action. When we are looking at goals, methods, and priorities for these purposes, there are a number of questions I've gathered for where we might begin to look, things we can ask inside of seeking discernment around our alignments, around what is possible and probable, thereby empowering our choices and our sovereignty. For goals, what are we each aiming to accomplish here? And what are we collectively aiming to accomplish here? While we're looking at those questions, who are we serving? Where are we operating? What does success look like to us? And why are we focused here? As we're looking at our collective in particular, asking who else do we answer to regarding our success is a piece that can help again with understanding within the collective about why certain choices are made. Because if we're answering to a foundation that gave us a grant, we may have to prioritize different things than if we did not have that external source of support that we needed to answer to. How do our personal goals relate to these collective efforts? This can help us be mindful of what in ourselves has driven us, called us to be here in this effort. and remembering that that's part of why we're here for us, and it's not necessarily part of why everybody else is here. So that's a part of recognizing what we're carrying in with us on a self-awareness level that can allow us to feel as empowered as possible by it and also refrain from judgment around it, right? And remembering that we might also understand how somebody else participates if we ask them, how do their personal goals fuel them to be here in this collective effort? Some starting points around methods. How do we want to approach our goals? What skills are needed? What resources are needed? These are some of the basic things that many operations take a look at. Some of the things where we can have a breakdown in communication or understanding come with the what do we need to take into consideration. If we have one person who understands the accessibility options in the building that we're holding an event at, and that is the person who's keeping track of it, and there's not a way for that information to disseminate, or it doesn't successfully disseminate throughout the whole of the collective, then the person who's advertising may advertise in such a way that it invites everyone of every capacity to a third floor room that doesn't have an elevator or any kind of accessibility option for someone with limited capacities around a movement. If we have a focus in our development, in our retrospect, that says, what do we need to take into consideration? We may have an opportunity before things get advertised to say, let's move this thing to the first floor. There is an accessible way into the building. Let's have different things on different levels, or maybe we need to find a different building. This lets us know what is possible, lets us know where boundaries maybe need to be set, lets us know if we can support our community in these ways, or if we need to be clear that unfortunately we cannot. So, spatially, socially, personally, collectively, legally, these are just some beginnings about needs, restrictions, and supportive factors that we might want to take into consideration or might need to. And then what intersecting realities need consideration? Now, I just mentioned one with capacities, physical capacities. There are also things we're recognizing that if we have people invited into our event they come from a collective that holds really strong ideas about queer people. It may not be safe for us to invite queer people to our event. It may also be a bridging event where we're inviting people to please come who feel like they have the personal resources and skills to be able to bridge understanding across that intersection. And we don't want anybody to be surprised by that. We want to make sure that we're clear so that we're only having people come who feel like they are both empowered, capable, and resourced in that moment to show up for a part of the method of what we're doing. Because if we're trying to build bridges between communities, that's some of our methodology, not just how are we going to post our invitations? Where are we sending emails to, right? Those are not the only methods. It's also how are we considering our communities and what we're aiming to do here through the goals via these methods. When we're looking at our priorities, what is our order of operations? What is driving our organizational process? Attachments to emotional, intellectual, experiential, cultural, moral, ethical, and more considerations may be what's driving our organizational process, right? If I have prioritized first accessibility for people who have limited physical capacities, I may be really insistent about our location in a way that doesn't necessarily serve that we also need a space for the archery event that's a part of our larger event. Okay? So maybe we need to go, oh, we need a place where we can have both these things. And unless we're looking at what's driving our organizational process, what our priorities are for everything we're doing, the loudest voice or the most resourced individual holding their information out for everyone to see may get prioritized by the collective, and it may not be a balanced representation of the attachments that the collective has around what we've chosen to do and how we've chosen to do it. And then what are the boundaries we need to work within? Our missions and ethics statements can be boundaries we need to work within. State and federal laws, maybe boundaries we need to work within or at least be really aware of. We have resource caps, right? We may only have so much funding. We may only have so much medicine for the wellness area for a group of a certain size that can be brought to this event, right? We may have participant expectations or things from within the social contract that need attending to. One of the reasons I get so excited about wellness spaces created by Raine is that it tends to the fact that there are bumps in the social contract arena that happen inside of gatherings, right? This is part of what TouchStones is all about. So when we understand the boundaries that we need to work within, we can also speak to them as we're speaking about our event, as we're curating our methods and choosing our goals, because we may end up having to rewrite a goal to meet expectations that people have that we have in some way agreed to or feel is in the core and the heart of the mission that we're called to. And then what potential influences might shift our priorities? Looking at this ahead of time can be crucial to pivoting smoothly. If we at least take time for this particular active consideration, which is where we're choosing to take time to look in depthly at some of what's happening, how we are going about a thing. If we look at the potential influences that might shift our priorities, we can then determine some level of what will we choose to allow to shift our priorities so we can have some staged boundaries. A really lovely example of that is when somebody runs a Kickstarter and they fulfill their first goals in like 3 days, right? Their stretch goals are points where they pivoted because that quickly filled goal being met allowed them to open up a next layer. They had a plan. They thought ahead and said, if we reach this goal, we could maybe go for this goal. We could include this extra thing for everybody who backs us if we reach this goal. Oh, I really want to do the hardback copies of this book. We could do that if we make it to their third or fourth goal in, right? And that's a really lovely version of recognizing what are we going to allow to shift our priorities? And what does that look like? How? Also looking at what unavoidable circumstances may shift our priorities. Having a blizzard come through is going to shift something somewhere for somebody. What happens if our keynote speaker? What happens if our priestess or priest? What happens if our land that we plan to gather on is inaccessible or any of those people can't make it to the space because this thing that we couldn't shift, we didn't have control over, came in as a part of our circumstance and shifted our priority? And how are we preparing for these possibilities? Do we have an online setup that can hold some of what we were doing if suddenly movement's not possible? That's a great way to prepare and have a backup plan that allows as much as possible to occur with a major shift in our priorities taking place. I'm going to take just a moment because I've said this thing and I heard you say it. things about it, this acts of consideration. My brain grabbed onto this as a whole thing earlier, and I have a little bit more information about it. Acts of consideration are a choice we make. What are they? They're points at which we choose to take time to consider thoroughly and completely what we are doing, why we may be doing it, and if we want to proceed in that way. At pivotal points, we can choose to take great care in how we are moving through the world. Taking a moment to take time for an act of consideration is more than the quick Passover. A lot of us get really good at the quick Passover, especially if we're built in ways that are geared toward being mindful or have developed into a mindfulness in how we move through the world. And there is time in most cases, and it is valuable if we feel called to take time for an act of consideration, this deeper look into things. It can be a point where we can help reset our nervous system, where we can root into and feel strengthened by and supported by our choices of action following that act of consideration. Something that I highly encourage people to do. It does not have to be about everything. We do not need an active consideration every time we decide if we're making a cup of coffee. However, there may be moments when we need to take that active consideration around even things like, are we taking the time to make the cup of coffee? What does it serve? Why are we choosing that? All right. The next thing I'm inclined toward is to mention that we have the conducive and corrosive alignments piece, but I feel like I would love to step back in with you, Rainey, and then know that that's available if when as it feels supportive.
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm sitting over here ruminating in your acts of consideration, and that being like a, it's such a choice of empowerment, a ritual act, a rebellious move. Like it's this
Mhm.
fast-paced society goes, come on, you gotta have this figured out. You gotta go. And this is like an act of rebellion to like, no, I'm gonna sit my ass here and I'm gonna think about it deeper than I've thought about it before because I want to study the ripple effects. I want to study the impact. I want to understand the intensity. I want to understand my motivation because all those things are like that support underneath of what might become our goals, methods, and priorities for whatever we're looking at. And I love it. It's a delicious look into something that is very simple. It's a lovely starting place. Yeah. Wow. Alignment pieces. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that was on my mind in that moment was that deliciousness of coming to a place of simplicity. And you mentioned the alignment piece and those conducive corrosives. And I was like, yep. And so, I mean, that's kind of where I am, unless you have a thing you would like to ask me or a thing that would feel like you'd love a ping off of something. I'm happy to receive a direction or pass it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my thinking was that when we look at stepping into assessing through, examining our goals, methods, and priorities while we're in the touchstone matrix, moving through self in relation, mission, and community, whatever's at center. A lot of what you talk through in the entire matrix guides people toward being able to be with and make choices rooted in awareness around how they're relating to themselves, with themselves, relating themselves to others, relating with others in the relationship arenas, and then to the larger scales. Um, that's where I really love the idea of being able to look at how things are aligned.
Mm,
Because when we start with, is this aligned? That gets us a certain part of the way. It can be a very functional, simple one-step question.
mhm,
When we look at how it is aligned, we can commit to deeper levels of stepping out of judgment into discernment and allowing ourselves to be empowered to do what is best for us as self, for and from other, us in relationship, peer powered leadership, inside of our mission or collective mission, inside of community, and the aggregate it creates and calls together.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. That piece of consideration as an act of choice, weaving with the simplicity of, is this aligned, into conducive, corrosive, through those different lenses. While most people may not be of the ilk to necessarily like think in all these brainy kinds of ways, to know that there's a way and a way to look at it both simply and complexly, that the most complex of a situation you could, like when I'm playing with the TouchStones, I'll put down the one sheet, the print off sheet on the table, and I'll grab some flat marbles, and I go, where's the problem? There's a problem here. There's a problem here. Oh, there's three problems. We're in the same spot. I put three marbles there, and I go marble, and I lay out the problem on the matrix map and go, okay, where's the simple here and where's the complex here? Where did things go funny? Is it because we had a misunderstanding? Are we corrosively aligned? Did we become corrosive? And if we are, do we become that way, or did we start out that way and miss it? Like where, and to be able to sketch out what is, so we can accept reality the way it is. I think that's a thing that a lot of society has shaped us into a way of this fantastical way of imagining that if we just simply do XYZ, we can make it so. And we can completely bypass the reality of what our isness is, and also in that same process miss the ability to be in touch with our divine calling, our spirit soul side of things. And so like this touchstone, this step-by-step process through these rifts of chaos. um, Touchstones in times of chaos was a byline, a tagline that came out in an earlier conversation today with a sister friend, especially in these times. Like, there's so many places where it's like, oh, there's these places of lava that are opening up underneath of us. Some are really affecting our lives, our world, our identities. Some are like adjacent to us, and maybe it's affecting someone we love or an idea we have about ourselves, and maybe not necessarily something we committed to in another kind of a way. And other things might be completely so far away from us that we have a hard time understanding it. But either way, lava's opening up all over the place. Like that old game we were kids, the floor is lava, and then you start jumping around. Well, the jumping around to the safe spots is like jumping to these different touchstone points that help us find clarity when there's confusion, help us find a moment of rest when we're pushing too hard, that can help us sniff when something's not in a conducive alignment. Like oftentimes we can smell corrosion. We can smell it like in nature, you can smell like the mustiness of a basement and there's mycelia growing down there, you can smell it. You can sense when there's something that's corrupt going on, especially those who are super sensitive. Some are very sensitive to justice and the way that fairness gets to be in the world. And those are our like canaries in the coal mine, to use an old adage. It's a way of utilizing that sensitivity to show us where looking at things in a little bit more of a nuanced way. Yes, some might say it's complex, and if it's attending to the nuances of the details, I think that's furthering our evolution. And that's so much what the alignment, conducive, corrosive system brings me to. I often come back to that and go, ah, oh, that is a wonderful grounding because it feels like it looks for the shadow and the shine and the shadow, and invites us to look at life the way it is and look at ourselves the way we are, while also honoring the mystery of what we might become. So we're not like losing those pieces. And we get to honor where we are now in this isness.
Working with what is provides a great foundation for then allowing our imaginations and our hearts to reach for what could be from a more stable foundation.
Mm-hmm. That. Oh, yeah.
I have the pieces on conducive and corrosive alignments that I'd like to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
In them, I reference goals, methods, and priorities, and that's actually where I first mentioned them.
Mm-hmm. For the record, I love this part of their system. This part always has me right, like, okay, cool, because there's so much nuance to it and it can apply. Imagine all the things I was talking about with TouchStones and where that can play a role in here. And it's like all these things plug in as ways of understanding the interconnectivity that we have in simple ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, do it, do it.
All right. I've got them in sets. When I envisioned these alignments, I envisioned them like conduits, like piping, right? When we're in symbiosis with someone, it's like we're existing in the same space, moving in such similar ways. And we are able to step into seamlessly working together. Goals, methods, and priorities are mirrored and work together seamlessly in that space. Then there's the corrosive alignment where we're still in that same conduit together. We're still in close proximity, only it becomes pressured, right? What felt really good to be so close and touching in so many places can feel really uncomfortable. There, our goals might be aligned, our methods may vary, our priorities vary in some distinct way, and actions by one or more parties are detrimentally out of sync with other parties. Collaborations, cooperation fails to operate smoothly across roles and lanes. When I consider that in the conduit together piece, the next one that I consider is in parallel. When we're operating in parallel to one another, there can be ways we can still support one another. There can be ways we can uplift one another. And yet we're not interconnected in ways where we're reliant on one another directly. In conducive alignment, that parallel has our goals being similar, our methods and priorities varying in ways that should not be collaborative. We can really love what the other party is doing, and it may not be a thing where we can intermix those streams. Reflection, celebration, and socialization as peers may be beneficial. This is where we may be in a leadership group together. We may be in community together in some other kind of way. And yet, these two processes, these two projects or groups may need to operate separately. When that becomes corrosive, it becomes segregated. Goals, methods, and priorities may vary. And any or all of these are being weaponized, either internal or external to the connection or the grouping or the pairing. And it forcibly separates parties. Um, Looking at things like when an adult comes in and separates children and says they need to operate in separate spaces because of whatever assumptions. Sometimes that's because the children were not getting along together. Sometimes that's because the biases of the parents are in inflicting that separation upon the children, right? that can happen to us inside of a work environment, that can happen to us inside of a community, inside of a family, inside of friendship circles. That segregation is corrosive because of the weaponization and the forced separation. Next, I want to look at the interconnected variants, the other interconnected variants besides symbiosis. We have compatibility and connectability, and their counterparts as corrosive alignments being combative and consumptive. So with compatibility, there are things that can be mixed, can have the streams cross. Goals, methods, and priorities may be similar, and they vary in ways which can be accommodated during collaboration, right? So that may be where we have two establishments in the same town that may choose to both be at a particular event and be supportive to one another. If you have two massage therapists that use different methodologies, they can so easily send people to the other party if they would be best served by the skills that party employs most commonly. If we're looking at what happens when that becomes corrosive, we're looking at combative. The goals, methods, and priorities vary, and any or all of these may be weaponized for the purpose of invalidating one another, validating the self, for the purpose of dominance or retaliation. We see it a lot in our politics, especially when people are running in races, right? We see it inside of lots of different mainstream organizations where the methodology is get everybody to believe that you're the best in every way and infallible, which doesn't bring our human and divine selves both into the room at once. When we choose to remove the weaponization, to instead of prioritizing self-validation and invalidation of other, and choose instead to step into honoring differentiation, we can shift from corrosive back into conducive. We can come to, instead of competitive, possibly compatible or parallel, and have a healthy relationship where everyone gets to exist. Inside connectability, this is where it's really highly possible to have collaboration occur. We've got goals, methods, and priorities are similar, and negotiations allow us to specify where and how collaboration can happen. That is, in my mind, a really well-boundaried, well-negotiated set of interconnected points, right? We may have a coffee shop and a bakery that team up and have a shared tent at an event in town, right? That's really connectable. They're not trying to get all of their employees to work the same way. They're not trying to make sure that they have matching uniforms. They're coming in as themselves and they're negotiating where and how collaboration can happen. Everybody gets to benefit from it. Shifting into the corrosive variant of that, we have consumptive, where one sort of eats away, encompasses, or completely overtakes the other. Goals and priorities are often similar in these, and methods likely vary. When goals, methods, and or priorities of one party overtake or override another, that again, if we step into mindfulness, step out of judgment, and choose to engage one another in mindful ways that allow us each to be and to be different and to find negotiated expectations that allow us to work together, clarifying the where and the how, maybe taking some things off the table if the how of that thing or where that thing wanted to be aren't compatible or connectable for both parties, then we need to pivot, right? We still may be able to come out of corrosiveness and into conduciveness, even if it means a change in the alignment type that we are utilizing, which brings us to the separate, other than parallel, alignment types. For our conducive alignments here, we have divergent. There is a point where things branch off, they become separate. And we have divided, places where we are choosing to be separate in a larger way than the in parallel. The corrosive variants are degenerative. That divergent, if it isn't allowed to diverge, can degenerate at the connection points, eroding trust, eroding both parties and their trust in one another and possibly their capacities as individuals. Um, for divergent, goals, methods, and priorities may have similar aspects or roots, and they vary distinctly at some point. Collaboration may be possible until the point of variance, if we can allow that to be the case, which is again where not allowing absolutism to run things or cap things can be super crucial. Degenerative goals, methods, and priorities may vary, and the application of goals, methods, and priorities, particularly the differences, actively disrupts trust within the connection. If you've got two people working together to bring a product to market, and at some point, someone chooses a different path and doesn't negotiate that separation, doesn't allow for that point of divergence to happen in healthy ways, then you can see how sometimes one of them will take chunks out of the other. Someone may leave that collaboration with the rights to the intellectual property behind the product. Someone may leave with contracts in place that serve them and leave the other out. And this is where that degenerative taking from one another can occur. We can negotiate our way back, and it can get really hard if we've allowed it to degenerate to a point where it collapses the connection. In divided alignment, goals, methods, and priorities differ. Direct collaboration is not advisable, and indirect support may occur. This may be two establishments in the same town, two organizations in the same town that choose to recognize that the other exists without being confrontation. Perhaps indirect support could be, oh, you've come to us looking for this service and we don't provide that variant of this service. They may be able to provide something like that at this other place. We're not deeply informed about what they're doing. It's possible, though. That kind of indirect support is a recognition of existence and acceptance that you're in somewhat shared space and a willingness to allow the best case for whatever client or the public or person maybe came to you first to know that they're an option. Divisive alignment is where focused by one or more parties, internal or external to the connection, to the two that we're seeking to understand the alignment about, is actively the focus of one or more parties, internal or external, is actively upon the differences within goals, methods, and priorities. This active focus interrupts trust and encourages disassociation of parties within the connection. That is where you'll see sometimes people tearing down the reputation of another. That focus on the difference and the demonization of the difference is where we end up even beyond weaponization and into direct offensive action. And that is a place where There should not be any sort of touching. At best, we may be able to get not acknowledging one another. Again, if you come into the ability to acknowledge and share the space in indirect ways without feeling the need to tear one another down, you can shift to a conducive version out of divisiveness and into dividedness. With all of these, I find it incredibly useful to remember that when looking at how things are aligned, I'm seeking to understand literally how our efforts and our stances line up with one another so that I can step out of judging that something is different wherever possible and actively step into how can I coexist well. I do not want a bear in my backyard. However, I do recognize that bears live in the same state I live in. How can I be with that information in ways that are as functional as possible? I saw a video of a man who put a basically a giant animal door in his fence because the bear kept breaking his fence to get to where it wanted to go because that was the route home. And so this is one of the ways that we can actively take into account how to coexist well, even if it's not ideal for us to be super integrated in our efforts. Uh, yeah,
I love the visual of making a bear door so he stops breaking the fences. And while you might not want him in your backyard, you definitely don't want him breaking down your fences to go through your backyard anyway. And so if he's gonna just do it, sometimes accepting the reality of the matter is building a door so he could just walk through.
exactly. Exactly. I had a dog who would ask for me to open the door so she could listen for whether or not the coyotes were around before she made her choice about going out or not. And I was happy to do that because I was really wanting to be in support of her being smart about her indoor outdoor time.
That those cute little these cute little stories remind me of I'd pulled up two things to kind of like sum up what we've been playing with. And one of them was the cube and the sphere thing that's like where you are in the thing. It reminds me of the bear, and it reminds me of the cat trying to figure out like where it fits into the whole of everything and what choices it's gonna make. So I want to just share this thing real quick. Um, this is my attempt to play with understanding things in as multilectic a way as possible
Mhm.
of how we fit into a whole of a thing. Like I've called this how what you are and do fits into the whole. So like it starts off with the premise that we are not only what we do, we are not only our roles, we are not only our labels, we are not only a mother, a husband, a wife, a worker, whatever. We are also a being just by our own existence. And so then what does that mean to be in relationship to something? So here let's just break these pieces down a little bit. So a thing to pay attention to is each point may shift in its representation to support what's trying to be discussed. The mission could be a moment, a person, an incident, an event, an organization, a perspective, a hypothesis.
Mhm.
So this is like a blueprint of how we can look at many things. So imagine the cube is the mission. The sphere that's inside the cube is the team, right? This is the team of the moment. You've got, okay, I'm hopping down into this quadrant here. This quadrant might be a specific kind of lane. This might be who you are versus who you are. Who
Mhm.
you are versus who are you.
Mhm.
They ask you, where are you inside of a thing? What is the kind of energy that you can hold? For example, a lane, this is where I want to just switch for a half second. We're talking about lanes here. Here's an example of where when I went to an event, I laid out the lanes that I was going to be playing at an event so I could keep track of the lenses that I was committing to looking through while going to a brand new event. And I wanted to see how it was going to be different than the roles I was going to play.
Yeah.
Right. So my lanes, the fire circle, ceremony facilitator, a space holder, apothecarian, those were all different than being a volunteer and a workshop facilitator and a core and a community member. So we go back to, there we are. So in this quadrant, we're looking specifically at who are you and how are you capable of bringing who you are inside of this lane. This is where we're asking you to dance well with your ego. It's like dancing in alignment with your own self. You can
Mhm.
also be, okay, this can also be a category. It can be many different things in this component. And so there's different pieces and parts. Every person plays a lane. So it's like find your lane, stay in your lane, play with others well in their lanes. So that's
Mhm.
kind of like that team aspect of looking at what are the lanes that everyone's playing. And that way we can really grok each other well and we can test those alignment strands.
Yes.
We go in a little deeper and we've got I'm going to come down here to roles. This slice, this purple slice inside of this sphere, this slice might be a type of a role, a degree, or a bandwidth, right? This is how we're going to like apply and use this kind of information and how is this being, what is this role that's being walked? That might be a level of authority, that might be a level of power or influence. You might be holding the treasury aspect of a business, or you might be holding the vision for an organization. You might be in many different kinds of places. And that hat that's in there at the very center here, hats may be portals to many other places. They can be parts of bridges and or containing threads to other spheres. So the hat, you're kind of like reaching into the hat like the Mad Hatter and you're pulling out what you need to do. And the hat is a thing that you're accomplishing. So like here on the mountain, I'm going to give you an example of these are the lanes and the hats of the mountain. And I'm not going to spend too long in this, just giving you kind of a glimpse. We've got an apothecarian. So these are lanes, roles. So these are the hats aspects, and sometimes they are lanes, right? So we've got an apothecarian hat, an accounting hat, builders, ceremonial, cryptocurrency, education, etiquette and languaging, facilitation support, facilitation itself, forging, free energy, gardening, green team, kitchen, livestock, logistics, marketing, medical, medicine making, operations, security, space elfing, tech and media, town run, tracking, time tending, vending, woods and waterways. And so we've sketched out kind of like these are all the different roles, and then we ask and invite people what kinds of things they would be drawn to playing with.
Mhm.
That's an application piece of those different kinds of hats, and those hats kind of go all over the place.
Mhm.
You know, this spot here in the sphere might relate to a specific task, and tasks are grouped under hats. So you
Mhm.
pull out what you need to do. And that task is really only a thing that's like one space in time. Like it's very, and because it's composed of everything else that's a part of it, the cube, the sphere, the quadrant, the lane, the slice, the hat, and the moment,
Mhm.
you're looking at almost like a quantum dynamic. In order to understand all the pieces and parts that goes into that moment, you're needing to pause and come into attunement with all the nuances in play. Otherwise, you might have missed the moment or missed the thing that's needed for that moment.
Right.
We can waste a lot of time by not tending to those pieces.
Mhm.
Yeah, consideration on this scale means a deep listening to all the parts in play.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, there's a few more pieces in there, but that's the general gist of it. Like being able to really see where we are in space and time with each other inside of moments.
Mhm.
And there's this, we have a process by which we use to check in with ourselves and with each other. And it's our mountain check in. And um, hmm, I'm trying to not flip too fast through things. That's that one. This is actually, oh, maybe this is the one. There it is. Not in check-ins. So this is our kind of like summary version of how we bring some of all of what we've talked about this evening, from alignments to looking at goals, methods, and priorities, how we check in with each other on the go. This one is both for self, our own humanity, and in relationships. So there's actually different versions of this check-in. There's ones that are designed only for self. There are ones that are designed for self and relationship, and there's ones that are designed for self, relationship, inside of a mission. And so that's, the deeper and deeper you get into a thing, the more and more there's the ask around lens stacking, because you're holding multiple considerations at play. And so this is kind of like that middle point one, where it invites us to look from physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and in our service. And our service being based in our self-care, our own internal, compassionate, aligned, reciproconomical empowerment, where we are taking care of ourselves for aligned reasons, not just because we're trying to manipulate ourselves into getting something. Like sometimes we can play tricks with ourselves. And so this is asking us to like really get honest and come into like the questions in the center, ask us, what are we going through, growing through, and harvesting, or getting out of it? Where are we in the space time of where we're coming from, where we're at, where we're going towards? So we can answer simple questions like this. It allows us to go, I'm coming from a physical place of blah, 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 and I'm also probably in need of these kinds of tools. I'm in a place of mental and my brain's doing these sorts of things, and it's probably wanting this bit of data. Maybe you can help with that. My emotions are feeling like this, and these are where I'm resourced. Here's where I'm not resourced. Here's where I could use some help in this place. Maybe I could just use a hug. My energetics, my senses are this, maybe my circuits got blown open, or maybe I was dreaming all night, or maybe I woke up very just disoriented, or maybe I woke up so focused and I was just like, where am I going? What am I doing? So we can check in with how we walk in our lanes, in our roles, wearing our hats and doing our tasks. So that way it can bring us an efficiency uh, that can make the nuances of what we've been talking about something that has a practicality in day-to-day living. Meow.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Meow. Mm-hmm. Do you have any final thoughts? Do you feel like you feel complete? We didn't decide how we were ending this. We were just gonna go, and we're sitting at like 5 minutes to 9. And yeah, how you feeling, lady?
I feel like we got to dance around all of the ways that these things interconnect, which is really lovely. We've done a lot of it in pieces, in
Mm,
segments, and it feels really good to lay it all out at
mhm.
once. Um,
We laid a lot out on the table.
we did.
We put this up on YouTube. This is like laying out. I mean, this is hours and days and months, years of application involved in all of this, and there's a lot of pieces on the table for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I think my mind is going back to our discussion last time we met, where we were talking about presenting this and the having found moments of understanding that moving through difficult moments inside of connection, inside of relationship, having been able, for me, at least in this last couple weeks, to have actively gone, right, we moved through our awareness level things and we're able to then look at what are our goals, what are our methods, and what are our priorities. Once we pin down, set on the table that these are the things that we've just experienced together, in a partnership, walking through that with someone and being able to look as I'm moving through it and feeling like things have settled back in and I'm ready. I know what we're doing, where we're going, how we're going about it, and feel very settled in our next steps inside that relationship, recognizing that we did all kinds of awareness tending. supporting one another in that, hearing one another, talking about each of us individually and then in relationship, which is where touchstone things came to mind for me.
Mm.
And then looking at the fact that that prepared us, having moved through that self column, and communicating and sharing those pieces, and then moving through the in relationship and sharing and communicating those pieces and how we felt about that. So then look at, okay, now what do we each want to move toward? How do we want to go about it? The level of relief I felt when realizing that our methodologies independently were aligned in conducive ways. There was such relief and such rooting into feeling safe inside the connection, feeling like the connection was going to be able to thrive even more because of moving through this process together, and then be able to set the priorities and where we may want to pivot, where we're checking back in, what we're bringing to one another, what we're accountable for and taking responsibility for on our own, and how that impacts the individuals and the relating. It's vividly useful to have these reference points in my experience.
Mhm. I like working with you. That's my simplicity. Hmm. It's good stuff, and we have fun.
This is true. True, true.
Yeah, these
In my
things have
experience.
such a deep matter in my heart and soul. It's such a big reason like behind like why Alchemy of the Seasons as a school matters to me, why Nemeton matters to me, why so much of all of that is playing out through the touchstone matrix. It's like my living it, and this is like an understanding of the whole of it, and making as much room as I possibly can for all of what could want to be created inside of a thing. Mm, it's a lot of yum.
Is beautiful.
Yeah. I appreciate this dance with you, lady. Well, on that note, how about we say farewell to those who might be viewing this, and thank you so much for watching. And be sure to check out Harnessing Intent. Wherever we post this, we will make sure that we put connecting points. If you would like to connect with RoniJean with the work that she does, they do, and the work that I do, you'll be able to find us wherever those places are. And if you've liked this video, you've made it this far, please like and follow us. We'll be putting out all sorts of different things to come. And if you're an organization and you're interested in what we're doing, I invite you to reach out as well. We're looking at different places where this might want to seed into the future and help things to grow. So I look forward to those times. And until soon, beautifuls. Mwah!
Mhm.
Mhm.